I basically, I work with neurological diversities, as Ken said. I do speaking at conferences and I do training events and, all manner of consultancy. But I suppose the biggest work that I do is I do observations in schools for young people with all manner of different diversities. That's a lovely one for you. And sort of basically go in as a problem solver. But I also did a TED talk called "From Disability to Superpowers," where I talked about the other side of neurological diversities, with a particular leaning towards autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. I'm going to want to talk about that a little bit in a while as well. So, but I think my starting point should be really to tell you that I am also diagnosed ADHD. I've been reading some paperwork about autism recently and some advisory paperwork about words that we can use and words that we can't use and things that we should and shouldn't say. And one of the things it says on there for autism, it says to not use severe or mild. But on my paperwork for my ADHD, it actually says severe ADHD. Now this is fine. I'm happy to use those terminology because in actual fact it fits in very well with what I do. So I got my diagnosis a few years ago. I couldn't tell you exactly what year because I don't really work like that. I might be able to remember what I was wearing on the day, but not the actual year that it happened. And I had my diagnosis. And that was because I'd been in a car park in Lincoln going to an ADHD conference, and I met a gentleman called Kevin Roberts, and you might know Kevin Roberts. Kevin Roberts has written some great books about ADHD. He wrote the wonderful book about Oscar Schindler, Schindler's Gift, where he talks about Oscar Schindler's ADHD. He wrote a great one about screen addiction called Get Off That Game Now. And then he also did one called Movers, Dreamers and Risk Takers, again about ADHD. And Kevin came up to me and he said to me, it's great to see someone with ADHD working on ADHD and advising on ADHD and training on ADHD. And I said, well, who's that then, Kevin? And he said, well, you, of course. I said, no, I don't have ADHD. And to which he responded by laughing. And so I thought about it and I thought, you know what? So I'm 55 now and maybe I was 45, 50 at the time. And I thought to myself, this guy's right. I need to go out and seek a diagnosis. And I sought a diagnosis and I sought a really good diagnosis, which was done over 4 days, 16 hours. 4 hours a day, 16 hours, which, as you'll know, for a person with ADHD to sit down for 4 hours at a time was quite tricky. But I did it, and there you go. Well done, Mr. Whitehouse. You've passed the test, and you've got what they call severe ADHD. So I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe this is why my training has gone so well over the years, and why I seem to have that little window into that ADHD world, because I really do feel that I do. And it makes sense that I'm kind of seeing it through the eyes of ADHD. So when I go into a classroom or when I go into any sort of education environment and other places too, I can sense the difficulties that people are having, and we can get some results quite quickly. So I'm not building myself up there. I'm just saying, that's how it seemed to work. And so that was kind of fun. And then I work with an autism support group called PACT, Parents and Autistic Children Together, and that's in Lincoln. And that's where I live. And we have kind of some really lovely conversations, these little workshops that I deliver. And they become very informal. And the families that I'm working with there, we've become friends, really. It's so informal. And I talked to them about the ADHD, and they asked me about the ADHD, and I felt really sort of happy sort of discussing it with them. And then someone else came along from Scunthorpe, also in Lincolnshire, another parent support group, and they said, Andrew, how would you feel about coming to deliver a talk about your own ADHD at our annual general meeting? And I thought about it, and I thought, no, I don't want to do it because I'm trying to avoid that lived experience. I'm living. So how can I put this? Yeah, there are professionals, and there are people like myself and many people watching today with ADHD, but never the twain shall meet, because that's not how it works, right? Well, why not? And so I took a little bit of convincing. So I said, okay, I will do this, but you're not to tell too many people. So I went along and I delivered this little workshop and talked about my own life story and growing up with ADHD and not knowing I had ADHD and all those things, thinking I was crazy and people being quite rude to me and telling me I talk too much and, or telling me I'm eccentric or, it's quite, some people really very, very rude, you're mad, you're crazy, that Andrew Whitehouse is crazy, all this kind of stuff. And, and then sort of going through life, not being able to keep a job down, and all that sort of stuff, and then working it out. So I started out as a teacher, and I was a teacher, and I could really only stay working in a school for a year or two, and I had to move on. And so when I set up my consultancy, and now I'm in a different place every day, pretty much every day, doing different things with different people every day, all of a sudden I'm really happy. And so, so I talked about this, and I talked about the fact that, I've got a house and a car and children and all the things I want, I've got a fabulous soul record collection and all, I'm okay, I'm doing okay, and I'm very, very happy in life. And so I shared this, and what I didn't realise was this is exactly what these parents wanted to hear. They wanted to know that their 8-year-old child, who maybe is always getting into trouble or doesn't cope well with things, just like me, is going to be okay. And that, that they're going to be able to navigate their way through life, but they have to find their own groove. And they have to find their own way of doing things. So my way of doing things was to create my own career, if you like. And I've been doing what I do now for over 20 years, and I love it. And I'm happy every single day of the week. And so that went on, and I delivered this, and we had a lot of very, very happy people. So I then kind of did more of this, and delivered this sort of. I kind of struggle to use the word sort of. I certainly don't want to say motivational. I really don't like the term inspirational, but just to give people that little bit of confidence that your children, it should be okay if you guide them through stuff. So then, because I've been doing the training and the workshops and all this stuff, people started saying to me, "You should write a book. You should write a book." Why would I write a book? Well, first of all, I don't want to write a book because it means sitting down at a desk. I have to write a lot of reports. That's the one thing I don't enjoy. And so it means sitting down at a desk and typing stuff up and being really disciplined. And then I'd write a book, and it would just be like everybody else's book about ADHD and have all the same information in it. And it would sit on a shelf in Waterstones gathering dust or whatever, And I kind of went, this isn't for me. And I know that I should write a book, but I just didn't feel it was for me. And then I had this, for those of you with ADHD, and for those of you who love and care for someone with ADHD, you'll know ideas come from nowhere in ADHD. And so I had this idea. I would write a book, but I would write it about having ADHD, not about ADHD. It's about having ADHD. And I would write this book, and I would talk about what it was like growing up with ADHD, but I wanted to write it the ADHD way. So what I did was I gave myself 30 nights, 1 hour a night, and I sat in bed with a laptop, and for 1 hour every night for the whole of September, I just typed. And then I got to the end after 30 nights. I did a little bit of editing on the hoof, but not much. And I got to the end and I said, right, that's the book. I'm not going to touch it because I wanted an ADHD stream of consciousness to go out there. Please don't think I'm trying to sell you the book, by the way. This is not. I'm just trying to talk to you about what my feelings about ADHD are. And I wanted to call it Andrew and the Great Glass Giveashitometer, like Charlie and the, Willy Wonka and the Great Glass Elevator. So Andrew and the Great Glass Giveashitometer. But then I decided that old dolls people might get a bit cross with me. So I called it Andrew and the Magic Giveashitometer, growing up with ADHD. So I did this, and I got to the end, and I did my 30 days, and I handed the book to my teenage daughter, Maisie. I said, Maisie, I want you to read this book. So she sat and she read the book, and she got back to me and she said, Dad, this book is chaotic. So I said, oh, grief. I said, should I change it? And she said, no, it's perfect. It's perfect. Leave it. So it's full of typos and it's even got diagnosed spelled wrong on the back page. And it's full of typos, it's full of everything. And then I didn't go through the whole publishing thing. I banged it on Amazon straight away, just boom. Yeah, self-published and put it out there. And so that was kind of my little story, and that was what I did about sort of getting my ADHD story out there. But what was absolutely fascinating was someone's just emailed me. I should turn off my emails. Hang on. I thought I'd done all this stuff. Close the window. Okay. Right. So anyway, so I got my story down. But what was fascinating was while I was doing this stuff, I found out about all sorts of family members, and I started thinking about, all the people that going back through history, that were potentially ADHD, certainly presenting like ADHD. My grandmother, to quote my Uncle Terry, during the Second World War, they didn't want for anything. And my grandmother slept with half the American army. That was my uncle's words, And it was interesting because I think we're survivors. I think ADHD people, we're survivors, and we will do what needs to be done to do what we need to do. And I totally get it. I totally get it. And my dad, I used to go to the pub with my dad for a beer, and he'd just wander around the pub talking to everybody. He'd get bored with my conversation and start speaking to the people next to us and have a conversation with them. And whether they wanted it or not, quite often they didn't. And so it was kind of at that point that I thought, my gosh, and that's where I thought about the Giveashitometer. Now, I did some kind of very loose work in schools. I've done some very strict work in schools, but I did some stuff on attention spans, and I worked out that I reckon. Now, this isn't exact science, but I use to help teachers plan lessons. I reckon that the average ADHD child in a lesson can pay attention for their age plus a minute, take away a third. So if you're 8 years old, your attention span is 9 minutes, take away a third is 6 minutes. And so I was watching this and I was thinking, my goodness, you can almost set your clock by this. You're welcome to borrow use, by the way, that little bit, and I did loads and loads of observations on this, and I was getting this. But what I also discovered was that was under normal circumstances, yeah? that was the normal circumstances. That was the sitting in a lesson, 8 years old, 6 minutes. Yeah. Um, Now, I have interests, and I don't know a lot of research about ADHD and special interests, but I have loads and loads of interests. I'm very much an obsessive. One of my particular special interests is record collecting, soul music in particular. That's my big thing, and I've been collecting for many years now. And if you want to talk to me about collecting soul records, you can talk to me all day and night. You can talk to me about record labels and release dates and artists and, venues where this music's been played and all the rest of it. And I will stay up all day and night and talk to you about this. So, if you want to talk about that, that's great. And as I say, I will talk all day and night. However, you want to talk to me about changing electricity suppliers, I'm afraid you're barking up the wrong tree. It's just not my gig. It really isn't my gig. And so I just can't talk about that. In relationships, when a partner says to me, "Sit down, Andrew, we need to discuss something," that actually makes me feel sick in my stomach. Yeah. And so I thought about this, and I thought about this machine called the Giveashitometer. Andrew with the Magic Giveashitometer. And I used to say to people, if they said to me something I wasn't interested in, I'd go, "I'm so sorry, I fed that into my Giveashitometer and nothing is coming out the other side, so we're going to need to talk about something else." And so that's where the Giveashitometer is. So that's what I call the book. But with the Giveashitometer, what you need to be thinking about is, how do I engage that person with ADHD? How do I engage that person with ADHD? How do I get that person to be able to do something sustained? And just feed the Giveashitometer. That's all you've got to do, So for me, fascinated by education, absolutely fascinated by education, fascinated by neurological diversities, fascinated by learning and pedagogy and behaviour and all the rest. I love it, but I couldn't be in the same place every day, like I said to you. So there's all your answers. Find yourself a job that you can go out and you can do all these things on a daily basis, yeah, and go out and do it. And if it's not out there, invent it. So I invented my job. And I've been doing it, like I said, 20 years. So, easy peasy, lemon squeezy on it, like a carb on it. And it's there, isn't it? So that's what I did. Now, 3 years ago, I talked about, I delivered the workshop for the ADHD Foundation, and I was on just before Rory did his little talk. If you were there, 2018, that was me. Before Rory's talk, and I mentioned something about ADHD and superpowers. Okay. And then I delivered the TED talk from disability to superpowers, where I tried to put a positive spin on neurodiversity. And that was all fine until I really sort of thought about it, and I thought, yeah, ADHD people do have superpowers in some areas. Okay, so for me, I told you, I'm a survivor, and all the Whitehouses are, and I do think most of the Whitehouses are ADHD, and I think that their survival skills come directly from their ADHD. However, just before Christmas this year, I was given a job to organise an action research project for a whole local authority of schools. I had to have dates for everybody, 30, 40 schools, and I had to, I've just read a comment, I freaking love you too. I had to sort out all the dates, and I had to do all the stuff, and organise calendars and colour code stuff, and I did it, and I sent it out on January the 4th, and it was out there, and then all the stuff came back where it was wrong, and people are going, "You booked me in for Good Friday," and or my date's on a Sunday, or my date is on the same day as somebody else's, because I really don't think us ADHD people are very good at that kind of organisation. And I was very, very hurt by this, that I couldn't do this, and I felt like a complete failure. So I just wanted to sort of, just share something with you about that superpowers and retract kind of what I said in 2018. Yes, we do have trouble with, we do have superpowers in certain areas, but we also have absolute, areas where we struggle with so much. And I'm going to say something, and I might bring the party down a little bit. But I'm going to share this with you. You wouldn't have said I got the superpowers if you saw me sobbing on the floor, because I couldn't do this stuff and I felt like a failure. And so, it's again, we talked about this, it's about finding your groove and sticking to what you're good at. And at 55 years old, I learned that I learned that I've got to stick to what I'm good at and learn to sort of to delegate out things that I'm not good at, okay, and things like that. So, it's just something to think about. And I was really deeply moved by, I do some work with coaching adults as well, and I remember working with an autistic guy, and he said to me, "It's a superpower I wish I didn't have." And so, there's a lot of stuff to think about there. So, somebody asked me just a minute ago on the screen here about what part of childhood I found the hardest, and what part of childhood, and they said they heard puberty was the worst. I would say for me, it was about 4 or 5 years old. So I started school, and school really confused the hell out of me. I remember my first day at school. So 51 years ago, I can remember exactly what happened. I went into school, and I was told to line up, and I didn't know what line up meant. And this is the weird bit. Everybody else did, and it was their first day as well. Who told them this stuff? Where did they get it from? And so they all lined up, and then this rather sort of unpleasant-looking lady came up to me and said, "Have you got a partner?" And I said, "Yeah, I got a partner." They said, "Well, who is it?" I said, "Jacko." They said, "Who's Jacko?" Well, Jacko was my monkey that I used to sleep with at night, my little toy monkey. And, my mother had knitted us matching jumpers. And so, and she said, "Well, who's Jacko?" I said, "Jacko the monkey." And I was told off for being rude, and that was the start of that was the very first day at school. And then on my last day at school, I was 15 years old. I left school at 15. And on my last day at school, they got this big, huge chart that a librarian had put up on the wall. And it had got a whole load of names. My name was on it, and a list of all the books that we got brought back. So on the last day, and this is a Christmas miracle, I brought the books back. Can you believe it? I never thought, oh, that's it. They said they wouldn't let us have our exam results if we didn't bring the books back. So I brought the books back and I handed them in. Not that my results were worth much. And I handed them in. And then I went to this chart that this guy had lovingly made, this huge thing. And I got my Swiss Army knife out of my pocket, because that's what kids carried in those days, I guess. And I cut out my name and the list of books, and got on the bus to go home. And this librarian came onto the bus, ranting and swearing at me and about destroying his chart. And so my first day at school and my last day at school mirrored each other beautifully. And so now I work in school improvement services, and so there's a funny little thing. But you know, it's again, isn't it? When you think about school, you know, and I talk about this, it is the most diverse place you will ever be with in your entire life. You know, when I went to school with a guy that ended up with a chain of hairdressers, another guy that ended up with a chain of estate agents, another guy that he was a diamond diver and drowned. There was a bank robber, proper bank robber as well, you know, guns and everything. And there were all these kind of crazy people, and I was supposed to make sense of all this, and I found it completely bewildering. And for me, adult life, you know, was the best. But I know Ken's keen to sort of ask a few questions in a moment, but the one thing that I will say is one of the biggest game-changing things for me was getting that diagnosis in my 40s and starting to understand, despite the fact that, you know, that I know lots about ADHD and I know lots about autism, and I do my work around it. I've been doing it for years and years and years to understand why I was the way I was and to be able to make sense of that. And so, you know, really, really, really sort of those diagnoses, they're hugely important. That self-understanding is hugely important, but most important is find your groove and feed your Giveashitometer. Thank you.
Great way to end the talk there, Andrew. Thanks very much for that. There's been lots of positive and interesting things going into the chat, saying great things about you. And just you mentioned there, just a very quick question. You know, let's go off topic. It is an ADHD conference. You mentioned the word groove there. You mentioned the word soul. Is it better on vinyl?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But you got to look after it, keep it clean.
Oh, well, we've 3 comedians coming up later. Let's hope they do that as well. Someone put into a question there, you know, ADHD are the best people to deal with a crisis, the worst ones to write a report about. How would you feel about that as a general overview of someone with ADHD?
Say that again.
ADHD people are the best to deal with a crisis, but the worst one to write a report about the crisis.
Oh, God. I'm a school governor in 2 schools, and I'm vice chair of governors in 2 schools in Lincoln, and I love my work. And I had this conversation with the head teacher of one of them yesterday, and I said, Dan, I said, you want the report writing, we do it on site, because the minute I leave this building, your report is finished. Now, the other school, he's worked this out with me, and he got me a little pro forma, and he hands me it on a clipboard with a pen, and he says, write down everything you see, and I'll get a secretary to type it up when you've gone. So I would absolutely 100%. And when I write reports on observations, I always say you'll get it in 14 days. And you know, on day 15. But there's no reason why I couldn't write it on the night that I got home. Why don't I do it? I don't know. I've done all that great work. Why don't I write the report? So yes, spot on. Absolutely spot on.
Excellent. Just a question, just an observation. You were talking about self-publishing the book. So, yeah. What sort of reaction did you get when you put the book out there? How did you feel about that?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I did it really for the parents of for the groups that I work with and any other parents that would want it. And the book went absolutely wild. And I think it's got something like 25 5-star reviews on Amazon, which absolutely blew me away. I mean, it's not even spelled right, you know. It's an absolute mess, this book. But for whatever reason, it was very cathartic for me. For whatever reason, people have really kind of they've identified with it. But you know, and all sorts of people have identified with it. People with ADHD, professionals working with ADHD, and the target audience that I said, you know, the parents. But I just didn't want it to be. I didn't want ADHD to be negative. I mean, here's a thing that I always say. You know, 2 things. Number one, when I get approached by an environment wanting to make their environment neurodiverse friendly, they always mean autism. Okay, that's what they mean. Yeah, and I say, okay, but what about ADHD? And secondly, that people don't like us. People don't like it. Again, in my 50s, I turned up at a school to deliver a workshop, a really in-depth workshop. I'm a qualified man, yeah? delivered that, and the head teacher said to me, "Is that right? You've got ADHD?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I hope you're not going to be hiding under the tables. I'm a professional man doing a job. You know, it's insensitive and it's rude and it's inaccurate, but people don't like us. You know, and it really is. It is somebody to put up their Marmite, yeah. Well, it is. You know, we are Marmite people, and I did put that in the book. Am I allowed to plug the book because somebody said
Yeah, sure.
So here it is. Andrew and the Magic Giveashitometer, growing up with ADHD. But
You find it on Amazon. Just a question in there from Maxine. Andrew, you sound like a man with a plan. What's next? Do you have a plan?
yeah, I do have a plan actually. I've always got a plan. So, and again, that's a very ADHD thing, isn't it? We've always got the next project coming up, and the next plan is that I'm involved with a massive school improvement, or sorry, not supposed to call it that, a massive action research project again across one of the London boroughs. I'm going to plug a lady that I'm working with who's called Rebecca Duffus. Me and Rebecca Duffus have been doing a massive amount of observations across schools in that London borough. And we do the observation, then we deliver training based on the observation in one school to every school in the borough. And what we're trying to do is really push the personal side of learning and the engagement for the individual. You know, we're looking at what they're doing for children with needs, so not just ADHD or autistic, but children with trauma, children with difficult home lives, children with behavioural issues. In fact, and it's going extremely well. And there's going to be a book out on that by myself and Rebecca Duffus. That book will be coming out. But the one thing is, it's worth knowing, Ken, that Rebecca's a little bit like me, so nobody's actually put pen to paper yet about anything. Not just yet, but you'll get it in 14 days.
Indeed. There's been an awful lot in the chat about people, going through multiple jobs, careers. And, we have a support group here in Dublin. It's the main support for ADHD. And we often talk about employment. And one of the things that came up, very recently was, several people, because of their ADHD, wasn't interested in what they were doing. And certainly they moved country 3 or 4 times. So is that something that, feel to yourself, didn't like you're doing, let's go and find something else?
Oh, all the time. I've walked out of more jobs, just wandered off, and again, so I went into education at about the age of late 20s, yeah. So before that, I did loads and loads of things, and then when I hit education, I was teaching. Did that for maybe 5 years. And I just kept skipping from school to school to school. Started doing what I'm doing, and it just sat, and it stuck, and it was absolutely perfect. So don't give up hope, people, because it really, what you're good at is out there. It's just think about it. Think about your skill set. Think about what makes you happy, and combine those two things. Talk to other people as well. Find out what they think, that you're good at. But yeah. I'm just off to the toilet, and you'll never see me again.
There's a couple of questions in there about the targeted curriculum and schools and attitudes. So, how do you think we're doing in terms of providing services for children with ADHD in the UK? Primarily.
Not as well as we're doing with autism. Not as well as we're doing with autism. I think there's still a massive lack of understanding for ADHD, and I think people are still. I think the biggest thing that we're getting wrong for ADHD is we're getting these kids to sit too long, which is why I always talk about that little ratio that I talked about, age plus a minute to take away a third, because I find that's a really good, people work well if they've got numbers to latch onto. I also think that there's not enough varied learning, so I put a model together for 60 minutes. In fact, I did it for 2 lots of 60 minutes, 2 hours learning, where every activity is 10 minutes and you swap them around. And I put that model together, and that's being used in an awful lot of schools as well. Rather, because we can't sit for an hour writing. Well, we can't do anything for an hour, unless it's bouncing, and so, and that, okay, I'm being silly, but, so I put this model together saying, okay, 10 minutes research, 10 minutes ICT, 10 minutes debating, 10 minutes speaking with a partner, 10 minutes sharing, and all that kind of stuff. And I did put that model together, and that helps. But it's getting people to understand. And I think, to me, a lot of professionals, and I'm fully supportive of the professionals, by the way. I'm fully supportive. If you don't know, you don't know, right? But I'm very keen on getting the message across, because they say to me, well, they need to learn to sit for longer. Or they need to learn to, no. Still, by the age of 28, I still couldn't learn to stay in the same job for more than a couple of years. So it's not, it's about accepting. It really, really is.
Whoa. Okay, I think Roy Bremer's just joined us. One very last question just before we wrap up. And this is really, I'm not saying this is an unfair question, but it's so large. Because you just talked about it there, and you sort of half mentioned it just a little bit in terms of the way you do things. The question is very simple from Fiona. Can you describe your method?
Method for what?
Doing things. Getting stuff done.
Oh, yeah. Do it, think about it afterwards. Like the Nike advert. Just do it. Just get out there and do it. Yeah, I have no method. And just for those of you out there, there was a little bit of confusion about this talk. I had no plan tonight. Just get out there and do it.
Just get out there and do it.
Yeah.
So a little bit Nike.
A little bit Nike. Yeah.
Oh.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Oh, Tony, it's great to see you. Are you at the test show tomorrow?
No, I'm not. I'm here.
You're here. Oh,
I've got another day.
okay.
Another 2 days of conference.
I'll miss you this year. I'm there tomorrow, so it's lovely to see you, Tony.
And you. Thanks again, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.